So I want to take a few minutes to update you on the FCA strategic review of retail banking business models, to highlight some of the key points the FCA is considering as part of this review, and to gaze into the future a little bit and to think about how the review could shape the FCA's competition policy and enforcement policy going forward. So what is the FCA actually doing? Well, the strategic review is a very broad, wide-ranging piece of work which ultimately the FCA hopes will help it better understand how business models differ across retail banks and the outcomes that these models drive in the sector. Are they conducive to competition? Of course, the FCA has already used the competition powers it acquired in 2015 to look at the state of competition in certain markets, but on a much narrower basis. For example, with its market study in the credit card market and the work it carried out with the CMA on SME banking services. However, whereas these studies were undertaken on a narrow basis, this strategic review is the first time the FCA has taken such a holistic look at the sector. In the short term, the FCA has said this work will inform its ongoing work on overdrafts as part of its high-cost credit review, its mortgage market study, especially when considering remedies that might make it easier for customers to find the right mortgage and switch to better deals, and also to consider whether competition in the cash savings market could be improved. We do expect, though, given the very broad nature of this review, that this work will also influence how it deals with competition in the sector in the future, and we're already seeing signs of that as well. So where are we now? Well, in the summer, the FCA published a progress report setting out in detail the work it had done so far and some of its early findings. At the heart of its progress report, front and centre, is that the combined market shares of the largest retail banks has actually increased by 10% since the financial crisis a decade ago. And the largest retail banks still have over 80% of the personal current account market. And this is despite the emergence of challenger banks, alternative business models, and the use of technology that has become more prominent over the last decade. Clearly, we expect the FCA will be concerned about this, and it might be a signal to the FCA that competition isn't working in the sector as well as it might do. And if that's the case, might this signpost the FCA to taking a more interventionist steps in the future in order to improve competition? We don't have time to go through all of the points the FCA has raised in its progress report, but the things that jump out to us are, firstly, the FCA has found that personal current accounts and easy access savings accounts help the large banks maintain a competitive advantage. They say this is because the larger banks benefit from having long-standing current account customers and extensive branch networks. So the larger banks have lower funding costs because they have better access to current and savings account balances than, for example, challenger banks do. And the cost they pay for access to this funding through interest rates is low. Challenger banks, on the other hand, cannot replicate these funding advantages because they find it difficult to attract customers away from the larger banks. There's inertia and customers typically don't switch. And in order to attract these customers, challengers need to offer higher rates of interest and therefore have higher funding costs. It's like a vicious circle. Another feature that the FCA has considered is that larger banks, which have long-standing customers, are using current accounts as a gateway to cross-sell other products and take more of a share of those markets as well. Specifically in its review, the FCA's analysis has found that customers frequently use the provider of their current account to also take out a personal loan, mortgage, or credit cards. So the FCA will be considering what all this means and how it affects competitions and outcomes for consumers. The FCA is now undertaking the second part of its review and is looking at the impact that certain changes might have on the market. For example, changes to customer behaviour, changes to banks' business models, such as significant branch closures, and regulatory and technological changes, such as those from open banking and PSD2. And that's important because it will of course be some time before we know how open banking and PSD2 will change the nature of competition, if at all. We expect a key focus in this second phase of work will be on whether these changes might lower barriers to entry and make it easier for new banks, challengers, to compete, whether by enabling greater access to customers or making it easier for customers to switch and potentially reversing the vicious circle of those funding advantages we've already mentioned. So how might this review inform its competition policy going forward? Well, we know that competition authorities have favoured behavioural type remedies and now technological remedies with open banking as a means of tackling competition concerns. They're focusing on encouraging and helping consumers to switch, and that they have avoided more draconian measures like breaking up the banks, despite great public pressure to do so. If the FCA thinks that these types of remedies aren't working, and that features of banks' business models might be an issue, might it need to try something new? After all, you cannot force customers to switch. One sign that the FCA might be ready to move away from behavioural remedies and take a more interventionist approach to competition enforcement, for example through price regulation, can be seen from the discussion paper released recently on price discrimination in the cash savings market. This paper highlights the concerns the FCA has about long-standing bank customers receiving lower interest on easy access savings account, and that they continue to do so because of customers' inertia and non-switching. A way of tackling this, which the FCA is considering, is to impose a basic savings rate so that perhaps those customers aren't disadvantaged by not switching, or that they are perhaps compensated with a minimum rate of return. The FCA has also just released a further discussion paper on fair pricing in financial services, which will also be of interest. And there really is a pattern at the moment of the competition authorities looking at pricing and fairness of pricing in financial services markets. The basic savings rate, specifically, alongside other pricing interventions, the FCA may consider following its strategic review, would of course be a significant departure from the behavioural remedies that we've discussed. And this is why we're staying close to these developments and to the FCA's strategic review and other pieces of work to see how it might affect competition enforcement policy going forward. And we'll of course keep you updated and share our thoughts with you as these things do develop.